Welcome to Adoption Roundtable, a place to encounter the latest adoption research, policy, and practice in an accessible way. This is a space for adoptees, adoptive families, birth families, and adoption professionals. I'm Dr. Emily Helder, a clinical psychologist, researcher, and professor at Calvin University. I am also the co-editor of the Rutledge Handbook of Adoption, along with Dr. Alicia Marr and Dr. Gretchen Robel. In Season 1 of Adoption Roundtable, we'll be having conversations with the authors of chapters in the Handbook of Adoption. They are top international scholars in a diversity of fields, and together we'll talk about their work and what it means for understanding adoption. Hello, I'm Dr. Emily Helder, and I'm here with Dr. Monica Dalen, who's a professor at the University of Oslo in the Department of Special Needs Education and the co-author of a chapter in the Rutledge Handbook of Adoption entitled Academic Performance and School Adjustment of Internationally Adopted Children in Norway. So thanks so much for being here. So I wanted to just start and ask you a bit about the focus of your chapter, because you started by saying that academic outcomes and school adjustment have been an area of focus among adoption researchers in Norway for quite some time, even before it was an area of focus for other research groups in other places. And I wondered if you could say a bit about why that was, what led you to, and your team, to focus on that area in particular.
Okay, when I started with being interested in international adoption, I found it was the end of 80s. It was a lot of focusing on how the children adopted from abroad managed the transition, the first time in the new adoptive family, how they attach to the new parents. And when you looked at the researchers in the field, it was mostly psychologists, psychiatrists, and some medical doctors. They were interested in the children's condition, both psychologically but also medical. And when we started, we were a group of researchers at University of Oslo, mainly in the field of education and special needs education. And we had been very interested in communication, language development, and we collaborated with many preschool teachers and teachers, and we were very interested in how are these children doing when they have to switch their communicating pattern, their language, into a quite different family surroundings. And because we all were into education, we were really interested in cognitive development and then further into school achievement. So we started in a quite other direction, and we didn't find too much interest in that field in the beginning. But then it has exploded, and everybody's very interested in cognitive development and especially language development, communication. But still, I think the academic achievement, not too many has really focused on that, and I think understood how important it is to manage in school and to manage higher education, to get a job later on in life. And the group of international adopted children it's a very interesting group in that manner, and maybe especially to have something to have with language to do, which we can come back to.
Yes, I'd love to touch on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that you do in your chapter is you do review sort of what research is out there, as well as talk about some of your own findings. And it seems like one of the things that emerged from that is just the high degree of variability that kids have in terms of their outcomes. And I wondered if you could speak a bit to how that impacts your ability to make more general conclusions about how international adoptees are doing academically as a group.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because what struck me and have been so obvious in all the years, during all the years I worked in the field, it is the variability, heterogeneity, and that you in a group of children, you find so great disparity in performances in different areas, not only in academic achievement, but all over. So it's so unfair to think of them and to look upon them as one group. And in all the research projects I have been into, we have a group that can perform very well on top, and we always have also within the same cohort a group that are doing very poorly and have problems. So when we started in this field, as I said in the beginning, we got lots of feedback from school teachers about they were worried about some of the international adopted children, because they really did not do very well, but then as a group they disappeared, because when you have this normal level, or you look at the median, the mean of a group, you squeeze the disparity or the variability. So I think that's it's so important that we don't talk about them as one heterogeneous group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this monolithic. Yeah. So one way maybe to understand a bit about why there's that variability is maybe identifying some predictors for, which kids are going to maybe fall in which group. And one of the predictors that's used often is age at adoption. And I wondered if you could say a bit about what you see as, the usefulness of that predictor, but also some limitations of that.
Yeah. I think we said in the chapter also that age of adoption is a classical variable in all adoption research. And in the beginning, everybody said, oh, if the child is coming as early as possible, it will be for sure that the child will do very well. And then you suddenly got some research outcome that showed that a late adopted child could do very well too. And if you look into the research literature, you find very complex outcomes. There is no clear main result of this. And it's not always the researcher are using the same point for what is an early age and what is a late age. Some are saying 6 months before 6 months is early and everything after is late, and some say 2 years, 3 years. So using age of adoption as a single variable for predicting outcomes, I think it's very wrong, because you have to look at the surroundings, the environmental surroundings where the child is growing up, and maybe also prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal environmental condition in the country of origin. And I think everybody would say that if a child maybe 3 years old has been in very, very bad surroundings, neutering, neglect, everything, we will say that, well, every year count not a good development. But then you can have a child 6 months of age having very bad experience and cannot manage to overcome it. So, I mean, and you can have a child being in a foster home, a wonderful foster home, being 5 years and do well when after adoption. So I really think we have to look into that much more differently. And I think a main difficulty here is that we have in many cases, we have very really valid information on how a child has had it in the country of origin, because we don't know, and we don't know if we can rely on information from orphanages, from foster, maybe partly foster families, or from actually the people taking care of the children in the country of origin. Because it's I've seen so many places that this doesn't always. I have been into orphanages in China, and what we heard about how they handled the children wasn't what we saw. So I mean, it's really you have to be careful. I think Michael Drusser is one of, or maybe some other researcher who really has gone into valid evaluation of the conditions in orphanages and can compare. Then you can rely on it for sure.
Right, right. Well, and with so many unknowns, it becomes so difficult to really make those kinds of comparisons and really study it in a systematic way. Yeah, yeah.
So I would be critical if you only use age of adoption. But then again, I can agree that you have to find ways of evaluating conditions and children's development, and some research are doing great jobs on that.
Yeah, as you think about other factors that predict outcomes, one of the things that you wrote about in your chapter was these mediating factors. So things that are impacted by the pre-adoption adversity and then contribute to some of the school adjustment. And so I wanted to ask you about a couple of those. Language to start. I encounter this quite a bit clinically, where it's very difficult to disentangle the impact of language learning for international adoptees, especially in the first couple of years that they're home, to disentangle that from learning disabilities or learning difficulties that are present. And it's very hard to assess that clinically because the tests that we have are maybe not in the language that they are most acquainted with. And in the US, the way our special education system can work, it can make it difficult for kids to access services for learning disabilities because we have to document that the learning disability isn't caused by a lack of exposure to English. And so it just becomes very challenging to get access to services. And yeah, so I was curious to hear from your perspective, how is this handled in Norway? Do you have advice for clinicians who are in the same spot?
Well, I think Scandinavian researchers were quite early in focusing on language development among international adopted children, just as because we started with education or aspects related to that. Then language and communication started early. So at my department, we have had courses. We have really focused on how to understand the language situation for international adopted children. And early, I think we pointed to that international adopted children are not bilingual or monolingual. They have to switch their first language because either they are very, very young or a little bit older. They have to switch their first language into the language in the adoptive family. And they start very, very early to do that. And it's, one would say, maybe too early, because it's so important to communicate with the people who are taking care of you and are getting you or being your new parents. So what we have discovered is that sometimes it goes too fast and they can communicate on a day-to-day language base. But if you and that can sometimes, they are so good in that. So it can sometimes be squeeze that they don't really get or grasp the concepts behind the word they use. And many of our preschool teachers and teachers have discovered this, and we discovered this. And it's so important that you early check out by all kinds of help you can have in materials to see, do the child really understand what they are saying and what it means, and then try to help to develop the conceptual background for. So we have worked very much on that, and you can see when you start in school, this is really so important, because if you read a text that you don't really understand, then it's much harder to read. And that's what many of our teachers have sent us feedback, that they feel they have need for more help in this. So I think it's very important to start early, checking out where the level of the child's cognitive development is, and then start to have intervention programs for helping them to really understand, especially when you go over to reading.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So I think that's a very great field, or field in Norway for researchers. I'm not actually into language research, but I have colleagues in my department who are very, very interested in this field. And I think they're doing a great job, and it's very important.
Yes, yeah, that transition from learning to read, you know, in early elementary to reading to learn as kids get older. That's often when I was seeing families clinically start talking about some challenges. Yeah.
But you have to handle the language on a more abstract, conceptual level to proceed on.
Yeah, yeah. As we're thinking about some of the other mediating factors that your chapter talked about, I'm wondering if you could reflect a bit on how understanding what those mediating factors are helps us understand maybe targets for intervention if we want to improve academic outcomes, like kind of what could we target upstream to really impact academic outcomes?
Yeah, and I think language is one of the very, and then over to reading, oral language, reading, writing, and check out and programs to help them to develop this field. Then you have another field also mentioned in the chapter, which is hyperactivity, ADHD symptoms. And that's a complicated field. And there are lots of experts more into neuropsychology and in that field, and medical doctors also. So, but I think that's a big develop here also. And for me, and what my experience is, that if a child has really problems to concentrate, to control impulse, you're talking about effort for control, and you are talking about executive functions. There's lots of new concepts to really put a focus on. You have to manage to stay concentrated and to fulfill a target if you are going to develop in your learning. And that is very difficult if you are distracted either by thought or impulses from inside or from outside. So I think some of the intervention programs we early used with brain damaged children, to shelter them, to really try to reduce the impulses coming from outside, also could be used here. But I mean, this is a very big field, and we also have all the medical treatment which are very much discussed. But sometimes you can understand uh, adoptive parents if they have a very hyperactive child and cannot get anything out of a school situation, and they get advice that maybe you should have a medical treatment, that they do that to help the child. And I have seen children that really then started to focus and to start to get into a very positive developmental circle. So I'm not an expert on that, but I think there will be lots of things happening here in this field. And now
Yes.
they start very early with practicing on effortful control and things like that. So, I mean, everything here is we can learn from.
Yes, yes. Well, and those executive functioning pieces are coming up so often in relation to other areas too,
Yes.
in terms of emotion regulation.
Yeah, emotion regulation, because that's another field that you also find in among international adopted children, you have a higher percent of hyperactive behavior. You also have externalized behavior.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you go deeper into this, you really get mixed up a bit. The executive functions, externalizing behavior, effort for control. I mean, this is a big not a new area, but it will expand, I think.
Yes, yes, I hope so, especially in terms of targets for intervention and really supporting kids. Yeah. As your study has progressed, you so far, at least in the chapter, you're reporting outcomes through third grade. And overall, again, in terms of group means, things are looking very positive for the kids. But at the same time, there's that variability in your sample that seems to be increasing, just as we talked about earlier. And so I was curious what kind of future research is planned with these children as they enter adolescence, and do you have any thoughts about or expectations about what you might find?
Yeah, actually, we tried to get funding for continuing our study to follow this group of about 90 children, maybe not that much in all grades, up to the primary school or maybe secondary school, but we didn't manage. And then two of us have retired, so I think we had to say stop there. And remember, the children in that group were not the most vulnerable international adopted children. They were all under 2 years when they arrived, and no really medical diseases. But I would love to see more research on these children into high school, further education. I think you will find the great disparity continuing, and some of them will get more challenges than others. So, and actually Norway are joining into a European study with, it started to be the focus of children adopted from Eastern Europe countries, because we don't have them in this study. And it's going on, Italy, France, Spain, Norway, and that is children in high school age, 17 years old, I think, but it's not focusing only on academic achievement, it's more broader. But we'll see how that will work. It's difficult to cooperate in this Corona time.
Yes.
To meet and to have everybody's. I think they have. It hasn't had that progress because of everybody being in a special situation.
Yes, yes. I know that the same thing is happening with my own research. So, so it is very challenging. Yeah, I'm excited to hear about that study. I'll look forward to following that and looking for outcomes related to that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for both for writing the chapter and also for meeting together.
Could I just add?
Yes.
Because I think you also mentioned that something about if we don't find the children, if we can't help the children that we now have this problem with reading, cognitive development, what will happen with them when they get up in this age?
Mhm.
And I was thinking of that because I think you can see two groups here. You can see one really will be dropping out of school, having big problems, being isolated and cannot come into the job market. And well, we don't know how much, we know that adoptive parents are very supporting and helping, but still. But then you have another group, which I could call the late bloomers. There are some of the adopted children that they are coming in there, they are developing, but they are developing a little bit more slowly. And then suddenly they can really manage more. I have seen that this group of children too, which I call the late bloomers, and they could do very well, although they didn't manage so well in the first. So there's hope.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad to end on that note, and also just to recognize how many different trajectories there are
Yes,
for these kids.
yes.
Yes, yes.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much.
Very nice talking to you, and good luck with your work.
Thanks for joining us at Adoption Roundtable. Please subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. We love to hear from you and have conversations about your reactions, questions, and experiences. We'd especially appreciate feedback if you have topics or questions that we could address in future episodes. You can find me on Facebook at helder.emily and at my website, emilyhelder.com. There you can sign up for my newsletter for the latest on adoption research and practice. Thanks for joining us.